You say near Oxford now, sorry.
Yeah, just on the Oxfordshire-Buckinghamshire border. So it's nice, countryside. It's good for the kids.
Yeah. Do you miss London? I mean, I did the same. I lived in London for five years and then moved to Manchester a couple of years ago. Like, do you miss London at all or not really?
I do, but I miss it. The thing is, I miss the moment in time, but it's like, they always say putting your hand into a stream. It's never the same moment twice. I miss it like I miss Britpop, and I miss it like I miss being in a band in Manchester and DJing. Right, brilliant periods of my life, but you can't go back. So there's no point worrying about it. And even if I did go back, the world has changed. It's not the same thing at all. So it's like there isn't anything to go back to. There isn't really anything to miss.
So just going back to those those questions you sent about yourself.
No, right.
Is it so? One of these is true. Is that right? Or one of these actually applies?
One of them's a real question. So what were they?
So it's number one's "Were Selfish Cunt the great lost band of their generation?"
No, but I wish they'd been celebrated more while they were around.
Right. Yeah, I've heard they're one of the bands that have cropped up quite a lot, like them and 80s Matchbox.
Maybe
underrated
about
at the time,
80s Matchbox. Yeah, great bands.
Yeah,
it's really weird, isn't it? The way some stuff just cuts through and other stuff doesn't, and there's so many factors. It's the team you've got around you and the being in the right place at the right time, and it's not just the music. You've got there's so many things that need to be in place. And you look at some of the bands that should have gone on to do more, but, just kind of fell by the wayside. It's hard. It's really hard. I was, I can't help but wonder where all those, which I suppose the point of the podcast, right? Where the hell all those people went to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like when I was growing up, do you remember Sultans of Ping FC? That track "Where's My Jumper"?
Yeah.
Right? That guy who was the lead singer is now a lecturer at university in Dublin or Cork or something, or Sligo. Anyway, one of the big Irish universities, and that's his full-time job. But he also happened to produce one of the greatest unsung classics of British rock. At the same time, and it's like, what do you do when the band stops? That's hard.
So the next one is, do you feel guilty about the Ordinary Boys?
Yeah, well, they were, I don't know, would we call them Indie Landfill? I don't know. They burned so bright and everyone got so excited for a short period of time, and then the whole kind of like, Preston's breakdown on Nevermind the Buzzcocks was just one of those moments where you're like, there is kind of being in the right place at the right time, and there is also being in the wrong place and doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. And I don't know, you just kind of got the feeling that he wasn't really built to sustain the fame. Poor fella.
Yeah, I think he actually said like a big turning point in terms of their following was because of a feature in the NME where he's supposed to be on the front cover with Morrissey, but it ended up being Paul Weller, I think. And they ended up getting quite a big like mod following from that they didn't really plan on, I suppose.
Yeah. And it is weird the way that those things define a band. Bono's always said the Anton Corbijn shoot for Joshua Tree defined the band as this kind of moody, distant, ethereal operation, when actually, as we saw with all the kind of pop mart stuff, they were much more, there was a real kind of jokey, playful, idiosyncratic side to them, but they weren't ever allowed to bring it out. And after that whole kind of pop thing imploded because it wasn't what the world was looking for, they went straight back to the Anton Corbijn thing for Everything You Can't Leave Behind, and everyone went, yeah, that's fine. That's the box you were supposed to be in. You do get defined by those kind of, which is why I think it's really important that it's pop music, right? So that visual side of stuff and the narrative side of stuff is as important as the music. Everybody, who always used to say, "Oh man, it's all about the music, man." It's like, no, it isn't. It's bigger than that. It's like Warhol understood it was bigger than that. The Beatles understood it was bigger than that. That kind of that context and that visual side is so much a part of the excitement and joy of pop music. And yeah, those things can be completely defining.
Yeah, definitely. Like when you think back to the big bands of the noughties, like the fashion was a massive part of it, with like the Strokes and Libertines and stuff.
Yeah, well, we used to. I mean, it was the thing at the time, but we used to talk about viewers, not readers. That nobody was coming to us straight off to. It wasn't the words on the page that were driving people to spend the money to pick up the NME. It was the visual experience of diving into that world. It was then fulfilled by words, but when you open the pages, you start with the images and then you drop to the words, right? So we had to make sure everything was pinging off the page, to make sure that people would engage with it to begin with. But yeah, that whole sense of pop culture and fashion and that explosion in the 60s, that's where my head was at. Is all of that stuff was as important as the stuff that people were swinging around to on indie disco dance floors.
The next one I found quite funny. Just said the Pigeon Detectives. Why?
That's proper Indie Landfill, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're just one of those bands that you kind of go, no disrespect to them, because they were nice blokes and everything, but one of those bands that if they'd never have existed, would anybody have noticed? No. To be honest with you. Yeah, that's when you kind of got the feeling that mud was getting chucked at walls in record labels, and kind of anything would go. Are they still around? Are they still doing something? You spoke to them?
No, I haven't, to be fair.
You've got to dig into that. That's definitely got to be unpicked.
Yeah. I know what you mean. It was like, I'm sure we'll get into it, but there was like it was almost like a different scene where it became a bit more, it became for a different audience almost, kind of like an element of those indie bands.
How do you mean? What?
I don't know. I just I think about bands like
subgenre?
Pigeon Detectives and maybe like Cortinas. It just seems it's almost like a Radio X type audience where there is a crossover, okay, but
yeah,
it's almost slightly more mainstream, more laddie, I suppose, maybe.
Yeah, no, I totally know where you're going. Yeah, I think there was. Yeah, there was definitely a positioning thing going on. Do you remember there was that? There was a scandal, very much kind of accelerated and expanded by the NME, obviously, where they'd been at a gig, or they'd done a gig at a club, and they'd done a wet t-shirt competition, like during the gig or after the gig or something like that. Anyway, there was some poor unfortunate lass who I think she'd obviously she was kind of part of the whole thing, but she'd ended up in a kind of with no bra on, with a t-shirt, wet, and it had been this kind of blokey thing that had happened. And I think quite rightly there were elements on the NME that went, what the fuck is going on there? We can't be endorsing this sort of bullshit. And yeah, I don't think that did them any favors in the long term. They really struggled to get past that. I remember the PR was livid. That gave Terry Hall a very difficult time.
And then I really want the next one to be true, to be fair. Is it true you're the godfather of Johnny Burrell's son?
No, I'm definitely not, and I definitely wouldn't be. No, Razorlight kind of fascinate me. I went to the gig when they played on the top of the Bricklayers Arms in just off Old Street, Shoreditch, which, you know, it's got to be the most East London kind of noughties indie moment of all time. It wasn't quite the Beatles on the roof of Apple Records on Savile Row. It was this, you know, top of a pub. But it just, you know, there were people hanging out of windows and there were kids down below, and it felt so exciting at the time. And I remember going to see them at the Monarch at the Barfly shortly afterwards. And I think it was one of those gigs that had been booked way in advance, but they still had to fulfill, but they were much bigger than that at that point. Or it was the record label making sure they booked a small gig just to kind of create some buzz so people couldn't get in. But again, just felt like, you know, the most exciting band on the planet, and burned incredibly brightly, and for about 3 months. And then nobody wanted to work with Johnny Borrell because he was such a prick. He really was fucking awful to everybody that was around him.
Really? Did you have some experience of that?
No, I didn't. I just had no interest in going anywhere near it. But there was, do you remember the time when he was at South by Southwest, cruising around on some great big Harley Davidson with loads of black leather on? It was like, yeah, see you, mate. It's like, that's over. Let's go somewhere else.
Yeah. I always remember that. Is it the America video where it's just him singing to camera? Just like kind of sums it up a bit.
Yeah, it was just so badly done, man. It's like, oh, it's not like any of it was necessarily a bad idea, but I think there was that real tension because everybody on the scene loved Andy, the drummer, right? Andy Burrows, right? He was just a lovely guy. I spent quite a lot of time with him, actually. He was one of those blokes who he would always be in the, you know, whatever the kind of after gig drinking place was in whatever venue it was. And he was just a really lovely, normal bloke, and you could hang out with him and have a drink and have a chat, and he just glowed. You just wanted to, you know, be around him and spend time with him. He was almost like the anti-Borrell. And to have the two of them in this band locked in eternal conflict, quite rightly, Andy obviously just eventually sold this for a game of soldiers and did his own thing.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, he ended up being the drummer for David Brent at one point, which I thought was quite funny.
He did, yeah, well, this is it, right? He's got no pretension, so he'll just do anything. And that's not to say that he's got no standards. It's more that he just approaches it from an entirely joyful point of view. I think he does quite a lot of film scores now as well.
Mm. Yeah, they've actually just got back together as well, haven't they, I think, Razorlight.
What, with Andy?
I saw it via his social media, really? I think, yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember there was that, it was a couple of years ago now, but Johnny Borrell put out a kind of, there was a rehearsal that he'd done on a solo project, which was him and some other people, pretentious types in a bedroom having a jam, and it was this kind of Afro beat thing that they had going on. It was like, oh god, yeah, no thanks.
So I'm assuming this last one's correct then, which is, did Donny Tourette threaten to cut you up?
Yeah, he certainly did. He was absolutely coked off his tits. It was backstage at V Festival, which I just stopped going to V eventually. It was always part of the job that you kind of had to go to all the big festivals, particularly ones that, you know, we were kind of covering in depth. And we were contractually obliged to cover V. They never got quite the coverage because obviously the V review issue was also the Reading and Leeds preview issue, and a Reading and Leeds preview was worth more than a V review, so they never got the cover. But yeah, we had porter cabins backstage in the VIP area where we were doing all the NME stuff. And the lineups were usually a bit crap. So you spent most of your time kind of back in the porter cabin, having a drink and a smoke and chatting away. And yeah, there was, I'm pretty sure, no, it can't have been Ronnie Joyce. It wasn't Ronnie Joyce. Who the fuck was it? It was another guy, Tom Wilson North, I think it was, who was just one of those London scenesters that was hanging around. One of the kids that ended up just kind of dropping down from Hampstead to Club NME in Camden. Anyway, I'd ended up speaking to him, and he ended up bringing Donny into the port cabin. And so there were just the three of us, but Donny was absolutely spaced out of his mind, clearly coked up, really, really fucking aggressive, and just itching for a fight and itching to show off how fantastically punk rock he was by picking a fight with this little prick of an NME editor. Like that was going to make him the big man. And yeah, I eventually just told him to fuck off. And that's when he pulled out, I seem to remember him pulling out a knife. Maybe he had a knife, maybe he didn't, but he was certainly like, this is it, man. I'm going to fucking cut you up. Wow. And I was just like, just fucking grow up. Yeah. So I turned around to Tom and said, get this cunt out of here now. Not interested, which he did.
Excellent.
But I have to say, fair play to Donny. He apologized several years later and we got on very well. I can't even remember where it was when that happened, but I do remember that it did happen. I always liked him. I liked House of London. I mean, they were a band at a time, right? They were never going to be successful because there was nothing else around them. They were kind of, they were almost in the wrong scene, if you like. But I was very much into, as a kind of a little teenager, I was very much into hair metal growing up, late 80s. So, I had a bit of an affinity for Towers of London. But yeah, there you go. The wonderful Donny Tourette, who went on to be, I think I'm right, a yoga instructor of all things. Yeah, yoga instructor and mindfulness coach, which is not to. And there's some kind of aborted Towers of London reunion that was supposed to get together a couple of years ago and didn't, but theoretically is still on the cards because it's basically him and his brother, and they've had a bit of a rolling, lineup. But the original lineup was supposed to get together. But yeah, he went and discovered himself and started posting stuff from Thailand on Instagram.
Excellent. That'd be mate. I might have to try and get him on then if quite.
Yeah, dude, he's a good laugh, and I think that personal journey is probably something worth digging into.
Yeah, I remember a clip of him. They had I'm sure they did a video diary at one point, and there was some funny stuff on that where he's.
They had a TV program.
Yeah,
which just kind of followed them around. And again, it's one of those slightly desperate record industry things where you go, look, we're just not getting the traction anywhere, but what have we got going for us? We're really wild, man. Right, well, let's make sure all this shit is documented. Why don't we sell it into a TV channel? Yeah, it's not quite the same as producing a good album, but it's it's at least you're trying.
I just meant when he was on Nevermind the Buzzcocks, it was funny as well.
Yeah, totally. But this is it. Don't fuck with Simon Armitage.
Yeah.
He's just smarter than you are. He's not only smarter than you are, he does not give a shit. I tried to get Simon to, he was a natural choice to be presenter for the NME Awards. That was one of the big things that you had to decide each year. And, we had a couple of meetings about it. But you had a meeting with Bill Bailey about being editor of the presenter of the NME Awards, and you kind of sit down, have a pint, and it was basically like, do I like you? Do I think you're going to fuck me over? No, I don't. Okay, fine, I'll do it. But what's the gig like? How do you handle it? Simon just had to do it with the writing partner and was just massively overthinking the whole thing, and he wanted to do it as a kind of a pastiche of itself, and it was this incredibly convoluted thing, and eventually it was like, look, honestly, this is not going to work out, we'll have to call it quits. Because it's like it's part of his genius that he just doesn't play by rules at all. If he goes into any situation, he has to destabilize stuff and deconstruct stuff, and that's obviously what so much of the dynamic of Buzzcocks was just kind of being an anti-panel show. But yeah, the idea that anybody thinks that they could get on that, and what was it Donny was doing? He started smoking, didn't he, during the recording? And Simon was like, oh, hello, big man.
Yeah, he's like, oh, look, he's smoking. What's he going to do next?
Yeah. Put his feet up on the table.
Yeah. Had his shades on and that.
Mm.
But then they showed a clip of him from the TV program where he's shouting, "I dick" on the Sex Pistols, and he looked, he was in a similar state to what he was with you, I think.
Yeah, there was a lot of coke with that band. A lot of coke.
Yeah, I can imagine. You said NME here, so yeah, I remember Russell Brand. That was quite a memorable one where he took on Bob Geldof, didn't he? That was quite funny.
Yeah, that was there was a couple of years where when we were really firing, that kind of 2004 to 2006, when everything was just running at full pelt, and we were this massive cultural force, and sales were going up, and yeah, everything was going right, and we were embarrassing the Brits, or getting to a point where we were embarrassing the Brits, and we had Russell Brand presenting the NME Awards. We booked him before he broke, and then he broke, and then suddenly we had this incredibly hot talent, and the Brits picked him up the following year, because I tried to book him 2 years in a row, which was kind of slightly unheard of, but I'm like, dude, dig in, like, you've got this. Couldn't make it work, and then the following year we had Matt Horn and James Corden. Can you believe that? Because they were hot because of their TV show, and the Brits nicked them the following year. So we became this kind of feeder thing for the big gig. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, the Russell Brand thing was great. I as a result of that, I got a mention in his autobiography, which is pretty bizarre. Yeah. The second one, My Bookie Wook 2. So he actually, it was such a pivotal moment for him. My Bookie Wook, the first one, goes up to just before the NME Awards, and My Bookie Wook 2 starts with the NME Awards and goes forward.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, he fit that pair. I can imagine he was quite into all that scene as well at the time.
Yeah, well, I don't know whether he was, to tell you the truth. He understood the iconography of it, and he dressed well. I think he was far more interested in West Ham than he was in any of the music that was going on. But he was just brilliant. He was just such a force of nature on stage. The kind of like the glamour and the presence and the intelligence and the confidence, and he's a bit of a mixed bag now, but at the time he was just perfect. He was absolutely perfect.
I mean, that one liner about Geldof was superb. If you came up with that on the spot.
Yeah, well, this is it, man. I can't remember what it was. What was the line?
Paul Geldof there, obviously an amazing man to whom we have a lot to be grateful, not him calling me a of course. Really, it's no surprise that he's such an expert on famine. He has, after all, been dining out on I Don't Like Mondays for 30 years. Best film now!
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, no, that was straight on the spot.
Cool. Right.
I always remember that NME Awards, because we kind of vaguely themed it just to kind of give it a bit of a buzz, and Doctor Who had just come back, and I think actually by the time we did it, David Tennant had turned up looking like a member of the Ordinary Boys in Converse and stuff. Anyway, Doctor Who had just come back, so we did it as a kind of like a sci-fi thing, which took a kind of B-movie edge to it. And the visuals that we had in the magazine were these kind of hyper-real kind of pop art cutout things of these bodies, but instead of heads, they had kind of flying saucers. And
yeah, I think I remember it, yeah.
Yeah, though the skinny arms and legs that were on there were Reese from The Horrors, because he was doing work experience on the photo desk of the NME at the time. So we got him to pose for the photos for the collage that we were putting together. So actually, Reese's first appearance in the NME was without his head.
Right, so if we just take it back a bit, Connor, like, just gives an idea about your background and how you ended up being editor of the NME.
Yeah, well, being editor of the being editor of the NME, it certainly wasn't planned, that was for sure. And that was kind of part of the problem for me. I think there was a standard route to doing the job, which was start sending in live reviews. Somebody commissions you to do some stuff, and you end up hanging around the office, you get a job, you work your way up the greasy pole, and eventually you might get picked. And there was a bit of a swap over between NME and Melody Maker. So the two previous editors before me had both been over at Melody Maker, which had had its own dynamic. And I passionately loved music and pop culture, and I was in bands that never did anything. But the big thing for me was DJing. So I was DJing 3 nights a week in Manchester. There was a club called The Venue down on Whitworth Street, and it was the place that you went to when you couldn't get into the Hacienda. It was about 3 doors down. And we did, I had my own night on a Wednesday for a bit. We did Fridays till 4 and Saturdays till 2. And that's where I really got to kind of understand the relationship between music and it getting people to do stuff. So I'd always seen it almost from a kind of a dance floor DJ point of view. Those were the tracks that most interested me. And that, so the live stuff was great, but my heart was always in indie discos, and that's kind of what I was focused on.
Yeah, what year was this around? Was it early 90s?
Yeah.
Right.
So it's kind of 92, 93, right. 94. And so it was kind of the proper birth of kind of Nirvana and grunge, and just pre-Britpop. So I moved to London just as Britpop took hold, and then kind of cut my hair and bought some thick jewelry to wear around my wrist, and same as everybody else did, bought a pair of loafers, and junked my DMs. But I'd never kind of planned to be a music journalist. But what I did was, I was good at writing, and I got culture, and I kind of got, looking back, I kind of got business. Anyway, I ended up with a job on an internet magazine, working for a company called Dennis Publishing, because I'd always been interested in technology. I had a bit of an affinity with it, and so I was writing about all of that. And I got a press release over my desk saying about the launch of a new website, NME.com. This is how far ago it was, right? At a time when people didn't have websites, you would press release the launch. So NME were launching a website, and it was being held at an internet cafe, can you believe? Because nobody had internet access. Down on Golden Square in London. It was the Golden Square Internet Cafe, and I thought to myself, if I don't go down there, I can guarantee nothing will ever happen. If I do go down there, you just never know what might happen. So I thought, fuck it, I'll go down. So I went down on my own, not knowing anybody, hanging around, and I was outside, having a Marlboro Light and a bottle of Beck, same as everybody else, and I turned up late, as you'd expect, Steve Sutherland, who was editor of the NME at the time, wearing a ridiculous bandana, because that's what he did. And I just because I'm of that mind, I just bowled up to him and started talking to him. And I think I was the only person who was actually talking to him about the website rather than anything else. And so he was really interested. So we had a good chat, and that was it. And then weirdly, I had other kind of work stuff going on in the background. I went to see Pulp in Finsbury Park because we were living around the corner at the time. And I spotted Steve outside the VIP area. So again, a few pints to the wind, I just kind of bowled over and had a word with him. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm actually working on Ministry magazine at Ministry of Sound now." And he was like, "We really need to get more into dance music. Would you be up for coming in and doing a couple of weeks on the NME?" And I was like, fuck yeah, I'd be up for that. So as it was, I fell out with Ministry magazine, and they made me redundant. They fired me basically, because I told the guy who ran it that he didn't know what he was talking about. And so I ended up, doing 2 weeks on the news desk at the NME. And it was two of the most unpleasant working weeks of my entire life, and was just made to feel like shit the whole time I was there. And I swore to myself that not only would I never work for the NME again, but I would never work for IPC Publishing again.
So why did you feel like that?
You just got ignored and belittled, and you know the NME by that point had become a really, this was late 90s, had become a really kind of, there was a real Britpop hangover, and the bands weren't coming through, and dance music had taken over, and they'd lost their cultural cachet, and it was directionless. And Steve, bless him, had been hanging around too long. He was 9 years at the helm, and just nobody was interested in some young upstart. He was. I mean, indie was my background, right? I played guitar in indie bands, but because I'd come from a dance music magazine, that's what everybody saw me as. Plus, Steve had asked me to do a critique of the NME, which I'd done for him in advance, and just gone, look, here's a whole lot of stuff that you need to do to make it work. And he'd shared it with the people who were running it at the time. So they fucking hated me from the minute I turned up. And yeah, it was just really, really unpleasant. The only people who were really nice to me and just made me feel welcome actually were the old guard, the people that I'd grown up reading. So Stephen Wells, Tommy Udo, and Deli Fideli. I ended up it was Tommy who invited me out, because he was also on the news desk doing a shift, and he invited me out to Vox and Roll, which was Swells's poetry shouting event that he used to do at Filthy McNasty's, and I was like, fuck yeah. So I went down to that, ended up in a lock-in in King's Cross with Deli and Tommy Udo, thinking I'd died and gone to heaven. It was literally like the greatest possible thing that could have happened to me. It was amazing. Those guys were brilliant. I'm very sad that, we've lost Swells, and God, we've lost all three of them now. God, that's never occurred to me before. Yeah, it was difficult, because you still have the numbers in your phone,
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway. So it was difficult to lose Swells because he was just so brilliant, and difficult to lose Tommy. But I'd sent Tommy an email, years before, saying to him, look, if you basically saved me when I was there. Without it, the whole thing would have been a disaster. We discovered a few months ago, really, that Deli had died. It was so sad. Just amazing people. But yeah, so anyway, so I'd left and just was like, I'm never going to darken the doors of that whole setup again. And I then went over to Mixmag. I did 2.5 years at Mixmag at EMAP, and rode that wave of dance music when it was really fucking big, and Crasher Kids and kind of Darude Sandstorm and all of that other stuff that was going on. It was just like, you just kind of owned popular culture for a time. And ended up being offered the job as editor of music, which was IPC's dance mag, which was like third in the market, and which had never really occurred to me that it was IPC again, because you just said yes when somebody offers you your first editorship. And I went in there and said to the staff, like, I know that you've had a lot of change recently and editors have come and gone, but I'm here for 2 years minimum, because I'm going to bed in. I'm really going to make this a success. And inside of 6 months, they'd offered me the job next door as editor of NME. And so I was like, see ya. I just buggered off and went and did that. So it was a bit of a convoluted route, but it did mean that when I went in, I was 100% an outsider. There were large sections of the staff that fucking hated my guts before I even turned up. And I went in with zero support. I wasn't smart enough to go, I need to flip some of these people out and bring in my own people. So I was totally on my own and hated. And yeah, it was a brutal first 6 months, absolutely brutal.
How old are you at this point?
God, that's a good question. I was 26, 20. I was 27 when I started.
Wow. That's got to be pretty young, or is that like a regular thing at the NME?
Well, no, it was a weird. I was thinking about this the other day. It was a bit of a weird thing because historically, you know, you've got a big business like the NME, you need a grown-up running it, and you know that was certainly the case with Alan, who, you know, or Ian. You know, you go back to Ian Pye was an adult, and then there was Alan who was running it after that, and Danny Kelly, you know, was an adult when he was running it. Steve Sutherland was in his 30s, and then there was this feeling that they just culturally lost touch, and so there's this idea that somehow the person running it should be young because that will connect us with young culture. As you get older, you kind of realize these things are bullshit. But they got in Ben Knowles from Melody Maker, who is the youngest ever editor of NME, so he beat me by 6 months,
Right.
which I've never forgiven him for. But I got on with very well with Ben right from the start, but he'd also found the atmosphere at NME fucking toxic, and it had done him in, and he managed 2 years there. But yeah, and then they decided to kind of go again. But when I went in, they kind of put me in, but then they put Steve Sutherland back in above me as kind of covering fire. But I just, you know, I thought about it in a different way. I think previously it had been a competition for who's the best music journalist. And I understood that wasn't the job, right? You know, there were lots of brilliant music journalists who needed to be given the space to be brilliant music journalists. But the job of the NME was to make the cultural and business calls that would allow the magazine to be successful. And particularly because there were just this massive changing habits in the way that people, you know, that generation were engaging with media, and the internet was blowing up and mobile phones were emerging and everything was changing. It's like you needed to be on your toes, and that was my job, was to kind of set the ship in the right direction and provide a brilliant space for all this amazing talent to be great. That's what I was kind of designed to do.
Yeah. So this was 2002. Obviously, there's been a bit of a shift with the Strokes coming in. We talked to like Mark Beaumont about that and things, and he said it kind of obviously changed things a lot for the NME. How excited were you personally about bands like the Strokes and the Libertines?
Yeah, you're right. I inherited this thing that was already rolling, definitely. And, you know, I don't want to underplay at all the influence of James Oldham, who was deputy editor. He also went through the editorship and didn't get it, but we kind of reconciled kind of later on. But it was James who had really helped birth that whole, you know, kind of, yeah, the Libertines and the Strokes and the Stripes, and started putting all the foundations in. So I inherited something that was moving already. And yeah, I was just, I mean, you know, but you look at those early issues that I was doing, and there's a massive breadth to what was going on. You know, you had the Scissor Sisters on the cover. We did a Marilyn Manson cover. We did an amazing 50 Cent cover. This was, the theory at the time was still that we need breadth. We need to be able to engage with lots and lots of kind of fan bases, and we don't need to be tied to a kind of an indiness because it's restrictive. We need to be able to take a step above and be much more like a kind of an Entertainment Weekly and have a voice on popular culture that people will value. And all that was the theory at the time, which I spouted back to the bosses because I knew that that's what they wanted to hear. And we kind of tried it, but there's nothing as good as the scene, right? If you've got a fucking scene, that's the thing that's going to drive sales. It's a bunch of teenagers looking to define themselves culturally and set themselves against the world and have their own thing that they own. That passion and drive, there's nothing better for getting the whole thing going. So when that started to emerge, I was just like, fuck all the other shit. This is where it's at, right? So let's dig in. I need loads of bands, and I need stories, and I need US, and I need UK, and just this melting pot of stuff that you could kind of like pull, you know, loads of stuff out of. And yeah, it was just wildly exciting. I mean, just stupidly exciting. You know, I remember when the a kind of like a very early recording of Can't Stand Me Now came in, and we got it, and we had like the NME office stereo. I'm sure Bowie's told you all this, but we had the NME office stereo, and so and everybody would listen to the same thing, right? So it was quite a big deal to go over and put music on this stereo because everybody would hear it, right? So you had to take somebody's off, put something on, arguments all the time. That was the point. And I remember Can't Stand Me Now came in on a, you know, like a white label CD. It had just been burned onto a CDR, and they put it in. And bearing in mind, you know, we'd had the kind of first load of Libertine stuff, but then everything had, you know, kind of gone haywire, and nobody knew whether this was going to carry on or could they deliver or whatever. And you know, you got that first little kind of twangy guitar bit, which we now know is the middle of a loop of 60 times that they recorded that song, and they just took the one, which is why it loops round. Because they just took the cut. Yeah, they recorded it it must have been something like 60 times, one after another, and they just went back and took the one take that they thought was the best out of all of them, which is why it arrives already going. And they put it on, and everybody crowded around the stereo. It gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. And this narrative emerged from the speakers, where they were actually talking and recognizing the tensions between them, and recognizing all the things that we were talking about in the paper that they'd been talking to us about. And, you know, the light fingers, and, you know, was breaking into Carl's flat and nicking his NME award. And so we were kind of implied in that. And it was just like, such a cultural moment. You just looked at each other, and this is going to be fucking massive. It's going to be so big. And, you know, the magical moments like that were just absolutely fantastic. But at the same time, you know, people always say to me, "Oh, you were really lucky, right? You know, you had this kind of Strokes and Stripes, and this scene just kind of emerged." And it's like, we fucking built that scene. We were curators of the whole thing, and that's what had been missing from pop culture and from the kind of the indie stroke, you know, kind of. It's not just bands, it's not just guitars, but that sense of kind of crafted music of meaning had been missing. You know, when it works, you needed radio and music press and distribution all lined up. And there was smarts over at HMV, particularly at the time, that really got this scene and saw the potential of it. You had radio, XFM as it was at the time, really finding its feet. And then this switch from Steve Lamacq to Zane Lowe, which was pivotal because it suddenly meant you had a fresh voice on Radio 1 that could champion new music. And it suddenly switched on a whole new generation. So it's like, that was probably the death of, you know, the kind of like the back end of Britpop. And then you had that, and then you had us, and our function, you know, because we weren't an audio medium, our function was, you know, the visuals and the narrative. And I always used to say, you know, people would be like, it's all about the music, and, you know, we feature bands when, you know, they make good stuff. And I'm like, you're not an audio medium, right? We own words and pictures, right? That's the value that we bring to the whole setup, right? So what bands look like and the stories that they bring with them, that's what's valuable to us. Other people can work on radio stuff, other people can kind of sell records, but we need people who look fantastic and tell fucking great stories or create great stories, because that's what drives our bit of the business forward. So when you got bands that could do all three, radio friendly, looked amazing, delivered great stories, and, you know, were kind of properly selling, they would just spiral to huge success. So that was the game. But understanding what that role was in the whole operation you know, allowed all of those bits within the industry to click in together, and that's what turned this scene into this, you know, the monster that it was.
Yeah. Yeah, like you say, it was a very exciting time. And I imagine like a band like the Libertines kind of fit that role perfectly, where there's that element of unpredictability as well, that kind of with the stories that were coming out. Was it almost tempting to stick them on the cover nearly every time, just because I don't know what the sales were like, but I imagine they were big sellers when when Pete was going through his troubles and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, if you tot up who was on the cover most during my period, I think it's Oasis still, because they just sold the most issues. Morrissey's actually up there quite high, ironically. But yeah, the Libertines, you're right, they just created story after story after story, right? So you had to keep going back. What was difficult about it, though, was it forced you as an editor to wrestle with the dilemma of Pete and his crack and heroin addiction, right? And, you know, there was a real brutal darkness at the whole of that, you know, at the heart of that whole thing. There was, you know, nasty shit went on, and you had to sit there and go, you know, are we part of the problem here? Are we amplifying this? Are we creating an environment where we're effectively encouraging it to happen? And that, you know, that created sleepless nights. So you had to be, I think, you know, there was a responsibility to cover it in an appropriate way. You know, whether we did or not, well, I'm sure we failed, to be honest, but you know, it was a tension that was running through. But yeah, the Libertines just kept on delivering.
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting point, actually. I think talked about that with Dan Wilson from Black Wire about, you know, there was an element of debauchery being kind of glorified through that period. And is that what you mean? He didn't want to kind of glorify that aspect, or I don't know. He was a bit of a moral dilemma.
Yeah, I don't mind. I remember Dan from Black Wire. I had a really good night with him actually at Pigs in Leeds when we were doing the NME tour up there. I got on with him really well.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Yeah, lovely bloke. There's another kind of like ghost number that I've got in my phone that pops up occasionally. Dan Blackwire, it says. Yeah, I have no problem with glorifying debauchery, right? It's fucking rock and roll at the end of the day. That's the point. It's where people end up becoming. It's when it has victims that it's wrong. And you know, it's only in retrospect really that I look back and I can see, you know, who and where the victims were, and that doesn't feel right. I mean, certainly, you know, the NME was very consciously right on, and I was, you know, was always, you know, I always felt we should do the right thing. We had a moral and a historical duty to help create a world, you know, that a kind of a liberal and inclusive world for the teenagers that were emerging, and celebrate the right things and kind of chastise the things that we didn't think were right. And you know, if people want to go out and get stoned and you know, take ecstasy or whatever, that's one thing, but it's another thing when people are kind of shooting up and breaking into other people's homes to get the money to do it. It's, you know, that was not so cool.
Yeah. What was your personal experience of the Libertines like then? It seemed like good fun to hang around with, or quite unreliable, I guess, at some points. But
well, I mean, you know, as you can imagine, you know, Pete and Carl are two very different characters. You know, I got on really well with Carl, as everybody does, and you know, I've had some good nights out with him. Pete, I had no interest in going anywhere near Pete's circles or, you know, doing what he did. First time I ever actually met him, because I wasn't one for hanging out with rock stars, right? That wasn't my job. and I was never very good at it either, right? And it's like when we did the kind of like the Morrissey NME reunion interview, the PR said Morrissey's insisting that the interview must be done by the editor because it was a kudos thing, and I said, no, actually, I'm not going to do it. And the reason I'm not going to do it is because I know somebody who would be better at it than me. I have no particular desire to put myself in that ego situation. I've got Alex Needham as my deputy editor. Alex Needham was born to do this interview, right? So let's give it to him. So it was never my particular desire to go and hang out with rock stars. I was just much more interested in kind of telling the stories. So I wasn't going to the house parties or anything like that. But the first time I met Pete was at the NME Awards, and they were playing live. It was the first year they were playing live when I think they won Best New Band. It was at Hammersmith Palais, RIP, and they'd been sound checking during the day, and I was walking into the venue, or I'd been doing a phone call upstairs. That was it, and I was just walking out and walking down, and then Pete was walking up in the other direction, and it was like, you know, he obviously knew who I was, but I introduced myself, and he just very silently reached forward and grabbed my head and gave me a kiss, and then just walked off. It's like, yeah, one, you're pretty spaced out right now. But I think there was also that sense of, yeah, I took it to mean basically thank you, because without your support we wouldn't be having this thing that's happening right now. Or maybe he just fancied the pants off. I think that's unlikely, but there you go. But yeah, that was pretty much, as you know, that was probably my only interaction with Pete, whereas me and Carl just seemed to bump into each other all the time.
Right. Was that the year when...
And Gary as well, obviously. Let's not forget Gary. Gary was like everywhere. Lovely Gary. Big hugs, big smiles, and then would always just bounce off somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear a lot of good things about him, yeah. It was that the year when their acceptance speech, they did a poem, I think.
Yes, that was the one.
And yeah, Pete was... Well, I've seen it on YouTube, obviously, and yeah, Pete's flying.
Yeah.
But yeah, crazy times. Right. Yeah. So talking about journalists, I don't think I briefed you about this one, Connor, but I just thought of it yesterday.
Sure.
But we had, when Mark Beaumont was on, he's talking about when he gave 10,000 Things not out of 10, 0 out of 10. And Tom was saying how much of an effect that had on their band. He said it pretty much ended their career as a band. Was there any time you had to step in with the review, or did you just kind of trust your journalist, basically?
Very rarely. The only time, I mean, you know, there were things like, I remember Pat Long, who again, sadly, we lost a few years ago. Oh, it just makes me feel very old. Whoa, that losing Pat was tough, man. That was really, really tough. But yeah, I think Pat gave a Clinic record 10 out of, gave an album 10 out of 10. And, you know, as this thing was working its way through the system, there was uproar about, you know, well, hang on, if it's a 10 out of 10, it should surely have a double page spread. Otherwise the score doesn't mean anything, and blah, blah. And my attitude was just like, really, honestly, mate, it's fucking chip paper. Do you know what I mean? It's there for a week, you know, and then it will end up disappearing. So, you know, these little funny little sparks, because it was kind of semi-ironic as an album review, but those are the things that I loved when people like Swells broke rules in the 90s, you know, whether it was NME or Melody Maker, those little kind of quirky things where people were sticking two fingers up. It's like, yeah, a bit more of that, a little bit more Mr. Agreeable. The only time that when you ever needed to step in was when, you know, you knew that you were going to do a big interview with the band for the cover next week or something like that, and somebody delivers you a kind of 7 out of 10, a kind of 6 out of 10 album review, and you're like, this needs to be an 8, mate. Like, you know, it's either you're going to do it, or the subs are going to rewrite it under your name, or we're going to find somebody who will give it an 8 out of 10. So what are we going to do? You know, there was a lot of that went on. That's just the reality of music journalism. You know, the the idea that there's some, you know, how can you have purity to an album review? It's just, I mean, you know, things like Metacritic are quite interesting because obviously they try and you know, sit a level above and kind of collate all of that stuff into some kind of aggregation. But even that, you know, there is that kind of dancing about architecture element to it. It's like, you know, it's in the celebration, it's in the flow. You know, anybody who, the people who were on the NME who thought that they were, you know, kind of the paper of record and therefore needed to produce stuff that somehow would be tomes that would be handed on in years to come as a kind of a verdict of this or that. They didn't last on my NME because I wasn't interested in any of that sort of pomposity. It was like, you know, this is pop culture, right? This is a moment in time. You earn the place of being a paper of record by being relevant this week, and you do it this week, and next week you do exactly the same thing. What is the very best NME you can put out on this Tuesday in London and Wednesday in the rest of the country? That's it. That's the only question you need to ask. It needs to be really fucking exciting. It needs to be really fucking relevant. Do that now, right? And then worry about the next one the next time, and just do that again and again and again and again. And it's only when you look back that you go, oh, were we right to give, you know, Coldplay 9 out of 10 for, you know, a rush of blood to the head? It's like, you know, is that a good thing, a bad thing? Or, but at the time, it's just kind of like, make it happen. So, yeah, you know, those sort of discussions go on, but yeah, stuff gets tweaked.
Is that a similar thing with the covers as well? Like how did he come to those decisions about who was going to be on the cover?
Well, yeah, covers are such an emotive thing, aren't they? Blimey. The thing was, you know, the context was that when I took over the NME, it had lost its weekly, its status as the biggest selling weekly magazine in the country. It had lost it to Kerrang. Now, don't get me wrong, right? I have a lot of time for Kerrang and Metal Hammer. Those are the magazines that I was reading when I was, you know, kind of 14, 15 years old, because they were filled with the bands that I cared about. But Kerrang had originally been monthly and then went fortnightly, and then eventually it had gone weekly. And they'd got a groove with the whole kind of Limp Bizkit new metal thing, Linkin Park, all of that sort of stuff, the rock rap crossover, and WWF and all of that other stuff that was going on. And they just, you know, flown, and they were now bigger than NME, right? That was crisis, absolute crisis. It could not be allowed to continue. And so I came on with the job of, you know, getting to number one, but almost as soon as, and I did it, right? You know, within the space, we did the redesign, we got the scene going, and we got back to number one, and we started kicking their ass on a regular basis, and we became unassailable. Brilliant. But by the time things were really motoring in 2004, particularly 2005, MySpace arrived at the same time, and it just you could feel its chilling effect on sales almost immediately, because the function of the NME has always been, and certainly very consciously under my editorship, was to connect culture hungry young music fans with inspiring music artists. That's what you do. That's your job day in, day out. And if somebody invents social media, you've been disintermediated. You're literally not needed anymore, because if you want to hang out with Lily Allen, you'll go hang out with her on MySpace. You'll message her. She'll message you back, maybe. You don't know, right? But she'll share a whole lot of intimate details on this mass platform that she won't do with this kind of third party thing of the NME that you kind of trust or don't trust, or, you know, who knows, right? So that was massively disruptive. So, you know, sales, I was fighting really hard to get sales up, and then almost as soon as we got them up, you were fighting to stop them dropping again. So, you know, the whole time that I was there, you just had this slight panic in the background about, you know, where the fuck are the sales coming from? So the function of the cover was just to shift copies. from a magazine science, a media science point of view, the function of the cover is to make you pick it up and buy it. The function of the inside of it is to make you buy it again next week. You can't get somebody to buy a brilliant feature on Razorlight unless they know that it's in there, right? So it doesn't matter how great that feature is, the cover is the thing that's doing your job to get you to reach out and pick it up. So really, you know, and every cover was signed off by me. And really, as the editor, what you're doing is you're building covers on a week-by-week basis, and then working backwards to how can I fulfill this within a magazine. That's the theory. Didn't always work like that, but that's the idea. So the only question then becomes, who's going to sell the most issues? So that's why there's so much Oasis, and that's why there was so much Morrissey, because they were legacy artists that just did big numbers. And there's a lot of Muse, and there was a lot of Green Day as well, and there was a lot of My Chemical Romance, because these were all bands that you could absolutely guarantee. They sat somewhere between Kerrang and NME's World, but you could guarantee that they would shift copies. There were really surprisingly few of the indie bands, the kind of scene bands, that would actually shift numbers. The Libertines were pretty much the only ones, and Pete would do big numbers on his own. But nobody else. Franz Ferdinand were all right, but you know, Kaiser's never sold any issues. Block Party couldn't sell any issues. You know, there's you're constantly trying to put kind of new bands through to test the water, to just see if there's a little bit of traction. That Horrors cover, the debut Horrors cover, you know, came out of nowhere. So you kind of create an event, because I knew visually I could do something big. That worked. And it's why actually towards the end, there are so many Mighty Boosh covers, because the Boosh would sell more issues as a comedy duo than most of the bands that were around at the same time. So that was the decision. You were just constantly planning out cover runs based on, you know, what could be the biggest sales that you would get at any point. Right. But during my tenure, can you guess which was the single biggest selling new band, so debut cover of any band that we put out?
I mean, I'd assume it'd be the Arctic Monkeys, but maybe not.
Yeah, kind of, but that's cheating, right? Because they'd broken, you know.
Oh, sorry, so you mean a band that no one really heard of at that point?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I saw the Others were on there, which I thought was...
That's it. Yeah, it was the Others. It was the Others, and it was which was always just like, what the fuck. But yeah, the Others were the biggest selling proper new band cover that we ever did. Partly because sales were in a good place at the time, you know, right? So you're working from a bigger base, and I think it was one of those moments where there was so much interest around that band for a brief period of time that they couldn't sustain it. But yeah, God bless the Others.
Yeah, we had Dominic Masters on, which was quite an interesting episode.
Excellent. Yeah, good guy. There's somebody else who's been on a journey.
Yeah. Another one that got hammered on Buzzcocks as well.
Yes. There's a pattern emerging. Yeah. We build them up. Simon Amstell knocks them down. So just focusing, another one that I maybe didn't brief you about was the cool list as well, Connor. Was that something you introduced? The cool list. Wow. There's so many things that sounded like a really good idea at the time. It was actually a very good idea. It sold copies. It sold copies, and you know, much as people lambast it, they really fucking cared.
That's what I was going to say. It sounds like
really
we've talked to people
where they were in the cool list. Yeah. Do you know what it is? It happened. I take responsibility for it, right? Because it happened on my watch, right? So it counts as a me thing, but I won't either take credit for or kind of full responsibility for the idea, right? The idea is a classic Steve Sutherland idea, right? And it's, if you know Steve Sutherland, it's absolutely his mentality, because he's just such a fantastic disruptor. I've been in meetings with Steve Sutherland where you've got really complex issues and lots of people, and everybody's kind of eventually coming to a consensus around a particular issue, and if he spots that, he will just chuck a fucking mental grenade into the middle of it by asking a provocative question, and suddenly heads are spinning, rooms are split. He loves that shit, right? He just creates that dynamic. Brilliant at it, which, you know, made him a very controversial but brilliant editor. And yeah, the Cool List was his idea, and I think he had, you know, as an outsider, you know, somebody slightly removed from the magazine as kind of editor-in-chief, or not editor-in-chief, was it editorial director for the whole kind of group, you know, which had Uncut and, you know, a bit of Loaded and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, he was like, you know, the whole scene is about cool. It's about who's cool and isn't cool. He said, you should do a cool list. That's what Rolling Stone would do. And I was like, right, I should do a cool list, right? Because, you know, at the time I was very much like Steve says. So lo and behold, the Cool List was born, which was a little bit weird. But everybody, the fact is, it flew from day one because everybody got it. It was what everybody was talking about. And so that kind of question of, like, you know, bearing in mind that you know, there were lots of UK people, but also he's like, is Brody Dahl cooler than Josh Homme, or is Josh Homme cooler than Brody Dahl? Right, that's a good question. That's a proper pub question. That is, you know, 3 pints and, you know, kind of 40 fags sort of question, as it was at the time, because you could smoke in pubs. And facilitating and instigating those kind of, you know, being the catalyst for those sort of conversations was brilliant. I mean, it you know, it fizzled out towards the end, and quite rightly it got killed because it was a moment in time. But yeah, that was, yeah, for a while, people sat in pubs trying to come up with a list of 50 cool people and put them in order. It's fucking bizarre, right? You look back on it now, it's just nonsense, but it was great nonsense. It was important nonsense.
Yeah, so was it a group of you then who would sit down and decide who was getting it? Oh
yeah, absolutely. It was, I mean, the way those things always worked was the staff would just go to the pub, because I always had pages to sign off or meetings to have or whatever, right? It you know, NME Editor sounds very glamorous. A lot of the time it wasn't. But like I said, my job was to create this kind of safe space for these brilliant journalists and designers and photographers and subs to be brilliant, right? My job was to take the corporate shit and deal with the crap they didn't want to deal with. So those guys would go off to the pub and would come up with a list. And, you know, my deputy editor, whoever it was, Alex Needham or, you know, Chrissy Murison, would bring the list back, having curated the list with lots of people over lots of beer, and give it to me. And I might shift some of them around a little bit, you know, just to kind of put my mark on it, or some stuff I, you know, disagreed with. And then, you know, and then you might rejig the top 10 based on who you thought you could get good access to and who was in the country and what, you know, what combination would look best on the cover and all that kind of crap. But it's a made up list, so you can do that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, we had Neil Children on who said they thought giving Pete and Carl number one was a bit of a cop out, but I guess they're pretty.
Yeah, well, you know, exactly. But again, it's chip paper, isn't it? You know, that's what everybody's talking about that week. Everybody's talking about something else the following week, and then you go back around a year later and do it all over again.
Yeah. Right, just going back to the NME Awards then. I mean, it's obviously a massive, for someone who bought the NME, who was invested in it, like it's a massive event. What are your memories from it? And like, was it kind of something that was getting organized as soon as the last one finished kind of thing? Was it that big an event at the time?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely massive. It was so many moving parts, but I loved it. I loved it passionately. And I missed it awfully when I left. But I loved, you know, I loved doing the NME Awards tour with Chris York, who was at SJM. They had the rights to the tour, and Chris and I would co-curate a tour. And choosing those bands and putting together those lineups was, you know, just the greatest. And turning up to those gigs up and down the country and all the things that happened with that was just amazing. and then, you know, kind of deciding who was going to play live and, you know, who was going to be the presenter and shepherding it all through. You would call it nowadays, you'd call it a showrunner. That was my job, was kind of like to be the cultural touchstone of everything that was going on. Yeah, and it was brilliant, and it was always chaos, and I was always in a panic, and I always wanted it to be brilliant. And we had broadcast partners in Channel 4, so there were things that they wanted, but they were quite often in conflict with what made a good event in the room. And we needed to feel big, but we didn't want to be like the Brits, and, you know, all of those things. So you're trying to reconcile all those things all the time, which is why it was quite nice, actually, last year to be asked to go back and run the NME Awards again, you know, kind of 10 years after I left, where, you know, kind of slow time managed to nick a lot of the headlines from the event, but it was lovely to be able to go back and, you know, with a bit of age under your belt and just not panic so much. But yeah, those things were always done to panic because they just needed to be brilliant, and everything was on my head, and I never really got to enjoy them at the time, really. But we just, you know, we did some amazing stuff. And that last one that I did at Brixton Academy was just one of the most important things that I've ever and will ever achieve. You know, one, we'd managed to finally get it back to the venue that it had to be in, that we'd got it out of the O2, you know, the kind of the little venue, which is a bit of an awkward year. And finally got it to Brixton, which we've been working towards for 4 years by that point. Because that floor that they run the NME Awards on in that space is bespoke. It was built specifically for the NME Awards for that slot, and it took almost a year to get it built. But we had friendly fires with kind of Brazilian carnival dancers. I had Elbow doing a version of Grounds for Divorce with a kind of a string quartet or a kind of a small string orchestra behind them. And, you know, the Godlike Genius was given to Robert Smith and The Cure, who are my favourite band of all time. And I dearly, dearly love Robert Smith. And I got to meet Robert Smith, and he did not disappoint because he's the most amazing human being on the planet. And, you know, to put all of that together in that space really did, you know, that was the culmination for me. It was like mic drop, out, I'm gone now. But yeah, they were always, I suppose I was always trying to impose a structure on the NME Awards to try and make the show run as I had it in my head. And it's only really in retrospect that I look back and go, all the best things that ever happened with the mistakes and the chaos, because actually that's all anybody wanted. We did it one year in LA. The NME Awards NME Awards USA, and that was planned to be an expanded franchise. We were going to flip it West Coast, East Coast each year, and so we only managed to do one before the recession killed the whole thing, along with a whole load of other stuff. But yeah, we did it at the El Rey Theatre in Wilshire Boulevard, just off downtown LA. You know, legendary kind of 1920s cinema that had been turned into a gig venue. And we had, it's bizarre thinking back. We had Jane's Addiction as the Godlike Genius. We did the fucking reunion gig for Jane's Addiction. Perry Farrell and Dave Navarro, like, you know, playing in the room. It's like, fuck, how big was that gig, man? That's bananas. And we did it just before Coachella, so all the bands were in town, and Kelly Osbourne, who was massive, was down there. And Kings of Leon were in town, but I don't think they came to the event. But anyway, there's fucking loads of bands down there. And I remember one point before I was going to go on, because I'd announced the whole thing, and, you know, I was kind of host for the night, and then we got Jim Jeffries was hosting it. I spoke to him a couple of years ago. He claims he's still never been paid for the gig, which is fantastic. Yeah, we I was just kind of backstage, not backstage, I was just behind a kind of curtain. To the lectern was on the other side, and there was a presentation going on of an award before, and then I was going to come along and present the Godlike Genius to Jane's Addiction. And the whole, it had been a fucking shambles for a whole load of reasons, and this thing, you know, cues were not happening and people were falling off the stage, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And as it got worse, the audience got louder and they were screaming louder. They fucking loved it. The Americans had never seen anything so chaotic and rock and roll at an awards event in their life. They thought it was the best thing they'd ever seen. I was sat there shitting myself at the back of the venue, and everyone was going, "This is fucking amazing, man." It was the most bizarre night. And I'm sat there waiting to kind of go on and do this. And I could hear this kind of kerfuffle that's happened in front of me. And suddenly there's the curtain in front of me billows, and Mark Ronson just bodily falls backwards through the curtain so that his legs are sticking out on the stage. And he's just lying there, you know, kind of on his back, face up, looking at me. And he goes, "Oh, hi, Connor." And I'm like, "Mark, what the fuck are you doing?" And he's like, "Yeah, man." And then somebody on stage just kind of drags him out by his legs until he disappears from in front of me. And it was fucking all over the place. Yeah, so the chaos, it turned out all that time that I was trying to make it slick, it was the chaos that was the best, that actually everybody wanted. You know, so I can't remember which one of the cribs it was. I think it was Ryan slicing his leg open while he jumped on a table and broke one of the glass vases that were in the middle. Had to go to A&E, got pumped full of drugs, and then just came back. Came back to the after party and was sat there with his leg in stitches down in whiskey. Amazing.
Yeah, we had him on and he was saying, he said he got stitched up wrong apparently. So,
really?
Yeah, it could have been a lot worse than it was. But yeah, he came back and he was just dripping blood everywhere.
Yeah. Health and safety nightmare.
Yeah. Are there any stories about the UK awards that I guess we wouldn't know, kind of thing, like any backstage stories?
Well, sorry, the NME Awards.
Yeah, sorry,
yeah. I mean, you know, loads of stuff. Most of them, with all these things, involve Pete Doherty.
Right.
And that was always the question as to whether he's going to turn up, because he was the biggest tabloid draw, right? And you were looking to get coverage for that event. And Pete was the one artist that you could guarantee was going to get you column inches, you know, next day or the day after. And he knew it and we knew it. And so he was always a complete cock about the whole thing. And they were supposed to perform one year, I think. And then he didn't turn up to sound check. And then there was this whole thing of like trying to chaperone him from the flat that he was staying in into a car. And phone calls going on. Is he in the car? He's in the car. He's in, right. Okay, keep hold of him. And then eventually Pete apparently needed to stop off in Soho to go and get some guitar strings before he came to the venue. Where you get guitar strings at 8:30 at night in Soho, I don't know. It wasn't fucking guitar strings that he was picking up. And so he turned up. And by the time he turned up, he was smashed out of his mind. And that just went on and on and on. One year, Pete and Kate got thrown out of the venue by security because they had nicked all of the teaspoons from the table. All the teaspoons had disappeared. And security noticed and went batshit and threw the two of them out of the venue. And the first thought was, shit, we've just lost the two biggest tabloid draws from the actual event. And the second one was, that's the story, man. That is the story. I don't need to do anything else now. You can all relax, have the kind of night you want to have. Because Pete and Kate have been chucked out for suspicions of them doing heroin in the bogs. Yeah. Good times.
Yeah, that's something you wouldn't even believe in you wouldn't believe in the tabloids, isn't it? They got thrown out for nicking teaspoons. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So yeah, in terms of Godlike Genius, then was that similar to the Coolest, where you'd all sit in a group and decide, or how did that work?
That was me.
Right.
And because it's the privilege of the editor is to make those sort of calls. And the reality with all award shows is that it's based on availability, and therefore you're looking for people who are in promotion, in cycle at the time, and you work backwards from that. But the problem with those Godlike Genius Awards or the Lifetime Achievement Award at Q was, you're churning through them at one a year, right? Those kind of impact artists are not being generated at one a year, right? So it was very obvious that we were churning through them faster than they were being created. So you kind of run out eventually, which is the sort of situation that people are in now. It's like, how many times can you go back and kind of rinse the 60s and 70s for various rock stars? But it was always my decision. But usually you would have 2 or 3 options that you were working on, and then it's whoever was available and was prepared to play live and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah. Did you ever have anyone that turned it down and thought they were too cool for it?
Not as I can recall. No.
I mean, it's a pretty good one to get, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly. Yeah, not anybody that not anybody that where I'm not restricted legally, put it that way.
Yeah, but there was some. I mean, we had a couple of stories about after parties from the NME Awards, but there was some good nights out afterwards.
Yeah, bananas, absolutely bananas. Just bizarre stuff. There was who was the woman who Alex from the Monkees was going out with? Fashion designer. That's it, Alexa. Yeah, I remember being out on the street trying to hail a cab for Alex and Alexa so that we can get them into a cab and out without the tabloids jumping on them after the event. Just, really weird stuff was going on.
Yeah, so moving on to the Indie Landfill, which I think it was last year when it got talked about a lot because of that Vice article. But we had, like I mentioned, we had Mark Bowman on who, almost blamed himself and the NME journalists at the time for not coming up with a better term for that scene, which kind of, he reckons, allowed that landfill tag to stick. Like, what do you make of it?
Do we know who came up with it? I suspect it was Andrew Harrison. Was it? I've got a funny feeling it was Andrew Harrison because it's his sort of thing. He was the guy, used to be my editor for a brief time on Mixmag. That's when I first met him. But he was the guy who came up with the term Britpop when he was editor of Select. I love Andrew dearly. He's just brilliant. And I'm sure he came up with the term Indie Landfill. It was either him or Dorian Linsky. Anyway, the reason it's stuck is because it's right. And, so much of it is down to the way the record industry works, which is you've got a lot of record execs who are just looking for the easiest route to cash. And a lot of the time that means replicating what's already out there. And so you got this kind of self-fulfilling situation where everybody was just signing anything that moved and, from a band point of view, and putting it out there and shoving some money behind it. So there was just this massive oversupply of, bands, some of which were interesting and some of which weren't. But the problem is it was all so crowded out by that point that nobody had any space to breathe. Nobody ever made it to second albums. You look at the Horrors, who James Oldham signed to Luke over at Universal, who then got dropped after the first album, didn't do the numbers, and had to get picked up by XL afterwards to get a second album out. There was just so much of that stuff going on. So the notion of kind of churning through stuff really was driven by the kind of lack of imagination of the British record industry and the way it's set up. But we were kind of part of the problem because we had a scene and we had sort of scene blinkers on, and you know, the stuff we do, there wasn't a lot of diversity to it towards the end, but you know, that stuff is what worked, really. I mean, you know, it's always going to come to an end. That's part of the reason why I left, because I'm like, somebody needs to dream this all up again. And one, I don't think it's me. And secondly, I'm really not sure I've got the energy to do it again. It needed new blood. It was the right thing for the title, for the magazine, that somebody else took the reins. But you're right, the scene, I don't know, there was such a rush of stuff that it wasn't really appropriate to kind of stick a single name on it, like a kind of Steve Lamacq genre, you know, Camden Lurch or something like that. It was, I mean, there was that other term, the New Rock Revolution, right, which, you know, was much more of a kind of an early Strokes, Stripes, kind of Datsuns, Von Bondi's thing, the Vines, Hives, all of those sort of bands that emerged 2002 to 2003, a little bit into 4. But that was actually, you know, that was kind of coined not by us but by other people. I mean, do you know the story of that term and where it comes from?
No, I don't think so.
No, so I'm just trying to make sure I'm not boring you. But it was a cover line. It was the Datsun's debut cover, because what had happened was the Strokes and the Stripes had arrived. They'd just tilted the world on its axis. And I had a mate of mine who was deputy editor of The Face at the time. We'd both been on Mix Mag, and a guy called Tom Whitwell, went on to be digital director of the Times, of all things, and he was deputy editor on The Face. And he said, as soon as the first pictures and track of the Strokes came into the office at The Face, he said the entire staff dropped dance music and everybody turned up in Converse the next day. He said it was literally like flicking a fucking switch. Everybody was so ready for something new, and suddenly here was rock and roll again. It was like, fuck yeah, and it's American. So that pendulum had swung from the UK dance scene right the way across the Atlantic, right, which has just been happening since the 1950s. You know, it was literally like rock and roll, you know, turning up in 1954. And, you know, it was cool, it was distant, it was yank, it was hip, you know, it looked different, it had echoes of the past, it was just everything that you wanted it. So, you know, there's massive demand for guitar music and nobody's prepared. And this thing is running at the speed of the internet, which nobody had ever seen before, right? So that people are able to exchange stuff much more quickly than before. So it's running at an enormous pace. So you've suddenly got this gap. Record labels are suddenly going, fuck, we need some bands. We haven't got time to sign something. So who's on the books already? Who have we got who we can just plug the gaps? And none of the big UK labels had anything. But what they did have was associated labels in the rest of the English-speaking world who did have bands. So basically, they went out to the Commonwealth, effectively. So you suddenly got, as well as the American bands that were being brought over, you got all these Australian and New Zealand bands that were suddenly mysteriously elevated and being given promotional budgets in the UK to kind of plug this guitar gap that had been created. And it was only when Franz Ferdinand turned up. They were the first proper UK band that responded to that post-Strokes Stripes world that had been signed, kind of developed a little bit and kind of brought through. But in between, so kind of 2002 must have been, we did the Datsuns on the cover, and the cover line for the Datsuns that I wrote was the Datsuns all hail the heroes of the new rock revolution, right? So there's a big thing happening. Everyone's, you know, back into rock music. These guys are amazing. They've got these big tracks, stick them on the cover. And, you know, people started the context of it was that obviously Kerrang were big into new metal. So that word new had taken on this weird prefix connotation where instead of reading it as the heroes of the new rock revolution, this headline was read as heroes of heroes of the new rock revolution, as if this was a genre that we had, you know. So the Kerrang had new metal, we had the new rock revolution, and we started getting letters, bitchy ones, obviously, going, this is NME made up crap. You've just invented another genre, fucking music journalists, got nothing better to do. It's not real, man. You know, this new rock revolution thing, you know, it isn't a thing. And I'm like, it is now, because I didn't come up with it, you did, right? I didn't invent the new rock revolution by bitching about it. You've just framed it in a totally different way. So it started getting used as a term everywhere, to the point where I'm like, fuck it, let's run with it, right? So I then put out a new rock revolution cover-mount CD with as many of the bands as we could get that were part of the scene, and that just kind of became a thing. So the new rock revolution was as close as we got to a term that encompassed the bands. But by the time you got to it was the K bands that changed everything. So the Killers, Kaiser Chief, Kasabian, and Kings of Leon, right? The K bands, when they turned up, they bridged our scene and mainstream radio.
Right.
So there were suddenly bands that, you know, could play on Radio 1 and potentially Radio 2. And that was the big shift. They could certainly dominate daytime radio. They could get onto local, you know, kind of local radio station playlists as well. So those K bands shifted the dynamic of everything. And suddenly it kind of went mainstream. And at that point, it was too big to put a label on it. And all of that stuff was not Indie Landfill. It was mainstream indie, you know, in a kind of a Brit-pop sort of way. You know, Indie Landfill was the stuff that sat underneath, that never made it above that chasm between being some kind of, you know, a band that was playing, you know, Nabucco, you know, kind of 3 times a month, to a band that, or the Metro, or, you know, Barfly or whatever, or Death Disco, and a band that could step up and actually start doing UK tours and do some numbers. So I don't mind the term at all. I think it's highly accurate. It was a thing, right? Too many bands, too many of them were shit.
But do you not think that happens with every big scene, where you get the first wave of bands, and then, you know, the people that are trying to live off the back of that kind of thing?
Yeah, same thing with Britpop, and it was the same thing, you know, the same dynamic. It was slightly different in dance music because it was all track based, but, you know, happened in dance music to a certain extent in the late 90s. There was just too much crap. It's oversupply. But like I say, it's a dynamic that says as much about the way the record industry works as it does about the music press.
Yeah. And yeah, we had Jamie Reynolds on last episode who was talking about the term new raves, which was that something that the NME kind of got on board with as well? Yeah,
I mean, there was a piece that I contributed to. I think it was a nice piece about new rave. And again, there you go, Jamie. He's been on a journey.
Yeah.
It was that was a bit more conscious, because there was just a thing happening. Basically, there was just a lot of people from our guitar scene who just started taking a shitload of ecstasy, right? And so the music that was being made as a result, you know, it wasn't like it was some kind of rock dance crossover, but it was, you know, it had more of a kind of, you know, it's music very consciously to dance to, not just to listen to. So, you know, it wasn't of the kind of stand back stadium rock, or the kind of put on and appreciate music. It was music that had a function, and its function was dance floors, and they were indie disco dance floors. But, you know, licenses were getting longer, and, you know, I had this when I was DJing. It's like, you know, if you're DJing until 2, you know, that means that your peak, you know, you're taking people from pubs closed, and your peak is going to be about midnight, past. And then things are going to start kind of tailing off after 1 o'clock. If you're DJing until 4, you know, your peak is running a lot longer, and you're looking for other music that's going to sustain that high for that dance floor. And so stuff that was more dance orientated made a lot more sense. So there was all of those dynamics going on, and it was like, yeah, that was much more consciously coining a term. And then you got that kind of new rock versus new rave NME Awards tour where we did a double header, snaking around the country. That was good fun.
Oh, cool. Then yeah, just wanted to talk about kind of the end of your time at NME and the quote you gave to The Guardian, which I found summed it up quite well, where he said, basically Arctic Monkeys took the conversation away from the NME, which you had with the Libertines, and you said pretty much the Arctic Monkeys kind of, you felt like that was the band that killed the NME.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it before in a couple of places, but yeah, I can pinpoint exactly the moment when I knew it was all over for me, and you know, for the NME as I knew it and had known it. And it was going to see the Arctic Monkeys at Reading Festival the year that they broke. So I'm pretty sure Imran Ahmed was still New Band's editor. The guy went on to be A&R over at XL and was the guys who A&R'd Vampire Weekend. Smashing bloke, not seen him in years. But he, you know, he was the guy who was moving in those circles and had picked up on this band Arctic Monkeys that everyone was going bananas for. And you know, he brought some stuff into the office, and it was like, you know, I don't need to explain how amazing that first Arctic Monkeys album was, but it wasn't just the album, right? Because there were these tracks, these MP3s. It's like the digital space was allowing things to connect and run at a speed culturally that it had never done before. And we lived in a magic time between mobile phones becoming a thing and text messages enabling this speed of cultural exchange before smartphones and the iPhone turned up and social media really took hold. And that magic space of this kind of hyper speed culture, but pre-social media, was why everything ran at such a, you know, was such an amazing thing. Fast fashion, globalization also became a thing. So, you know, historically, if you saw a rock star wearing something in the pages of a music magazine, you would have to go and hunt to find it for months. And, you know, if a kind of a clothing brand wanted to bring out something that was inspired by it, it would turn up several months later. You know, the things were running so fast, especially with Arcadia Group, let's be honest, you know, you'd have rock stars wearing stuff in NME and it would be available in a matter of weeks, days sometimes, within Top Man or Topshop, because the supply chains had been brought so small. So everything was like, you know, the ability to be part of a scene and look like rock stars and everything, just the speed of it was incredible. And, you know, everybody knew the Arctic Monkeys was like you know, just I instantly knew, of all the years that I was going to be at the NME, this was the band. This was my Radiohead, right? This is the one that would be the big one for all time. So you're like, fuck. So, you know, we'd heard some stuff in the office. So I went to see them. They were middle of the day on the Carling New Band stage at Reading and Leeds. And we had a meeting booked with the manager later on, me and Chris York, so we could talk about putting the Arctic Monkeys on the NME Awards tour, because everybody wanted the magic opening slot. It was the one that Franz Ferdinand had and Coldplay had and the Killers had. The Kaiser Chiefs had, and all bands that had broken really big, and they'd all done this magic opening slot on the tour. It's like, you know, we'll get the Arctic Monkeys in there, we'll talk about it afterwards. So I knew that they were on. So I did the usual NME editor thing of like, I'm not turning up early for the gig, right? You know, it's like, who's in charge here? And so I, you know, leave at 10 minutes. And I thought I'll rock up. What I usually do is, you know, stand at the back of the tent, get a feeling for the vibe, how big's the audience, how are they interacting with them, what potential do I think there is on stage for this? Is it going to work? Are we going to back them? Let's see what we could do. I couldn't even get in the tent. It was 5, 6, 10 deep outside. And I'm like, what the fuck? Right? Is this the band? It's like nobody had put them on the cover. They'd not even released a record by that point, I don't think. They'd not even had a single out. It's like, what the fuck? So I managed to squeeze my way in. It was bedlam in there. It was absolutely fucking rammed. And not only was it rammed, there was a bunch of kids down the front watching the band who knew every single word to every single song they were playing. And we hadn't even reviewed a fucking single. And you just suddenly go, shit, it's over, right? We'd been totally disintermediated because they didn't need us anymore. Bands could go directly to fan bases, and the kids were sharing music with each other, right? So, you know, what value do you bring to a setup like that? It was like, fuck. So yeah, it was like, right, that for me was the moment. And, you know, started out as MySpace, which is what everyone was using. Then obviously eventually it became, you know, Twitter and Facebook and Insta and everything else that's going on. But that was for me was the moment that the dynamic totally changed. And, you know, as it was, we had the meeting afterwards, and, you know, obviously everybody was up for getting them on the tour. That's, you know, the way it worked for that awards tour was the biggest of the year. You'd see the bands over the festivals, particularly at Reading. You'd make a call as to what the lineup should be. You'd put the calls in September. Chris York would negotiate the deals, and then you'd put the tickets on sale kind of November, late November time, so that you had enough time to sell it out before the thing turned up, because the whole thing is like de-risk it, right? So you need to have bands playing to full venues, so you're not having to spend any money to shift those last few tickets, because those last few tickets are the profit. And we got to December with a bill that had the Arctic Monkeys at the bottom of it, and, you know, the call went back into management from Chris York that said, look, we are going to have to shift around the order of this bill, because we've had a word with the security at several venues. We cannot handle, you know, 4,000 people turning up at 7 o'clock when the doors open to see the Arctic Monkeys at the bottom of the bill. You know, it literally, people are going to get crushed if we do that. You know, we can handle it if people start streaming in a little bit for kind of support bands, and it gradually builds up. But if you've got the biggest band at the bottom of the bill, it's going to be mayhem. It's literally a health and safety risk. We have to move this band. And they were like, no, we don't want to do the big I am. We want to be, you know, kind of in the background, pay our dues and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, legally, it's just not possible. We can't insure it. So we're going to have to shift. So the Monkeys went up, and it was Maximo Park who were headlining it, and poor Paul and the gang, right? Because they then had to follow the hottest band in the country on every single night of that fucking tour, and it killed that band. It was the most soul-destroying thing, because nobody was there for Maximo Park. Everybody was there for the Arctic Monkeys. You know, 2 support bands, Arctic Monkeys, gig of your life, finally seeing the most important band on the planet. And who's on afterwards? Sorry, what? You know, it's back to the bar and have a pint. That was an awful thing to do to them, but we had no choice. You know, Maximo couldn't drop from the bottom of the bill, and the Monkeys wouldn't have taken the top anyway. But it was just a measure of how fast things were moving. But at that point, that, you know, all of our standard practices and processes were struggling to keep up. But yeah, the Monkeys were the band that killed the NME, or killed my enemy anyway.
Yes, what do you mean? Because it wasn't the NME's conversation anymore. Because
you couldn't. The NME, you know, the music press generally, they were the gatekeepers, right? I'd grown up in an age where Suede went on the cover of Melody Maker as the best new band in Britain, and I lost my shit. You know, I was at university in Manchester, and it was just like, it was like, you know, somebody had opened the gates to heaven. It was like, fuck, it's like this new band, and they've gone straight to the cover, and I've never heard of them, and they're so exciting for all these reasons that these people have said inside. And that cultural influence platform that you had as the music press to just kind of go, we're going to talk about this now, this is what's important. And you if you got it right, you were curating the scene. You were curating what the future of the music culture looked like in the country. People underestimate how massively important the music press has always been in setting the tone and the context for everything from the Beatles onwards, right? It was always hugely important, and we miss that in a world of streaming, where all of these platforms have disappeared. That sense of rarity and all those other things that everybody bangs on about have gone. But, you know, you could make that sort of impact. You were gatekeepers, and if you didn't back a band didn't succeed. That was it. And all, you know, record companies cared about, if they had a band within that sort of area, was like, you know, have we got the backing of the NME? You know, that's what they were asking of their PR people all the time. Can we get the cover? If they got the cover of the NME, they could take it to their counterpart in, you know, the record label in the States and go, we've had the cover of the NME, this is happening, you know, it's moving. They would then put some money behind it, promote it to radio in the US, and then it was, you know, we kickstart a career, blah, right? And to the extent that that's why bands like the Killers and Kings of Leon were broken in the UK first, because it was a hell of a lot easier to do that and get that cultural traction and import it back to the States rather than trying to crack America. So they were using our influence and our power. As soon as social media turns up and that kind of expansion, that hyper connectedness of the digital space, you don't need these people anymore. You know, the question instantly became, what's their following? You know, how many friends have they got on Facebook? Well, you know, what's their following? You know, how many followers have they got on MySpace? You know, how many streams have we got? And it instantly becomes a kind of a data-driven operation, you know, around word of mouth and advocacy and influencers and digital advertising and SoundCloud and all of that sort of stuff. And you're like, who needs, you know, the music press? I mean, I think NME's good now. I think they do a very different job. I think they've done a very good job of just burning the past and doing their own thing. There's almost nothing that's a link between what I was doing under those 3 letters and what's happening now. But that's absolutely the way it should be. Burn the past, go do the new stuff.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that in terms of, you know, the impact of the.
I'm going to have to go in a couple of minutes.
Couple of minutes, right?
Sorry.
Right.
Yeah, because my kids are going to get home from school, which I know is the least sexy thing in the world. But yeah, they're going to be home in a bit.
We'll move on a bit then. Is there anything you do differently about your time at NME?
Oh, loads, 1,000,000,001 things. You know, I would have. I'd have probably curated the NME. I'd have relaxed and enjoyed the NME Awards better. There's, you know, pieces I would have run, pieces I wish I hadn't have run, you know, but it's pointless going to any of that because it was a moment in time. That was the point. You know, you just did what you felt was right that week and the legacy kind of makes itself up. You know, you can sit there and go, I'm really proud of the fact that we ran a 1-page feature on Amy Winehouse, which was one of the first things that was done around Back to Black, you know, way before the album came out. And that was the power of Chrissy Mearison. She spotted it, right? And we ran a 1-page feature. And so we always had a link in with that, you know, when she exploded to become the kind of global superstar that she did. You could go back and say, I wish it wasn't a page. I wish it was 2. Surely we could have done more, but, you know, fuck it. At least we did something.
Yeah.
I'm pleased actually when I go back, you know, there's covers that make my flesh crawl. It's like, how the fuck did we, how did I put that out and think that was a good idea? But then there's lots of other stuff that you put out and you go, God, that's gorgeous. That is really a lovely piece of work. Bizarrely, there is a Johnny Borrell piece where he's got his top off, obviously, because he's Johnny Borrell, and he's looking to camera and he's got his fist up and he's got loads of barbed wire around his fist, black and white shot. It's a gorgeous cover. And I get, I mean, it's par for the course, but you get unfairly lambasted for, you know, kind of not as good as it used to be and all that sort of stuff. But some of the stuff we did was proper class. And I say that not from my point of view, but from Marion, who was the picture editor, and, you know, Joe Frost, who was the art director. And, you know, it was, those guys were capable. All I needed to do was just give them the right platform for them to just be brilliant. And they were. And there's some really class stuff that went out. They don't get recognised enough, actually.
Cool. And then we can finish on your story about Noel Gallagher, if you want.
Oh, yeah, Noel Gallagher. Yeah, it's quite a nice one, actually. My Noel Gallagher story is one of those things that I will take to my grave. It was the year that Oasis got the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Brits. And I got invited to the after party at some club in, I can't remember where it was. It was some club in West London. Anyway, it'd taken over the whole thing, and it was just one of those usual kind of schmoozathons where everybody and their dog are down there, and, you know, we're kind of, I ended up, there was this long hallway between the entrance to the club and the actual club itself. And if you didn't want to sit there in the kind of like the noisy dance floor space where you couldn't really hear yourself think, you know, the only place to kind of sit and talk and have a beer and a fag was this kind of really weird long hallway. I seem to remember it's kind of Chinese themed. Anyway, I'm stood there and I'm chatting away to Alex from the Monkeys and to his manager as well. And we're having this chat, and then suddenly there's this massive kerfuffle and the doors fly open of the actual club itself. And there is Noel Gallagher being carried bodily by two of his security guards, obviously utterly off his face on E. Just who's had the time of his life, right? Because he's just finally stuck two fingers up to the rest of the record industry. You know, he's got his Lifetime Achievement Award from the fucking Brits, and he's God on a stick for tonight. And he's clearly had enough by this. You know, lots of people have decided he's had enough by this point. Nobody needs him melting on a dance floor because there's going to be photographers and camera phones and all that sort of thing. So he's been lifted by a security guard and being taken out in that kind of very disruptive and very good-natured way that people are when they've had a few too many pills. And he's kind of moving out and he's chatting to himself and the security guard, and they're all moving at speed, and he gets halfway down the corridor and he suddenly goes, "Stop!" like this. And it's like stopped. And he turns around and he points at me and he goes, "Conor." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Thing is, right," he said, "I was always just a fucking indie kid. I was just always a fucking indie kid." And the security guards were obviously like, "Yeah, this is not going anywhere," and drag him out of the doors and into a waiting car. And I was like, brilliant. And I just turned around and I thought, all of this has happened right in front of the manager of the Arctic Monkeys and Alex. And that's going to make conversations a lot easier in the future in terms of, kind of kudos of being editor of the NME. I think, you know, it had far more to do with the drugs Noel had been taking rather than his particular affection for me. But it was a good moment.
Yeah. And did he say the Oasis broke up just before the last Reading Festival he went to or something?
Yeah, well, no, they broke up at Reading Festival. That was a fucking nightmare. My plan was having to, you know, I was on 6 months' notice when I left the NME. And by that point, right, I had a kick-ass team who knew exactly what they were doing, you know, and I was like, right, I'm going to finally enjoy the summer, because usually you're worrying about stuff at festivals because you've got coverage to sort and you've got a responsibility to look after people, get the right thing on the cover, make sure the shoot happens, the interview happens, write the cover lines, all running to time, blah, right? And this year I was like, you guys know what you're doing, right? You have done for years. I'm just going to enjoy myself at Glastonbury. And we're there on the Friday, enjoying ourselves at Glastonbury, and long story short, fucking Michael Jackson dies, and it's like shit, right? So suddenly all of our coverage gets torn up. NME.com kicks into gear, and it's like, you're not going to enjoy this weekend now. You've got to kind of see through this, you know, because you've suddenly got to do special issues that have got to get planned and commission stuff. It's a fucking nightmare weekend for a lot of reasons. And then, you know, over the course of the summer, I proceeded to start having a mental breakdown, because the idea of leaving the NME turned out to be a lot harder mentally than I thought it was going to be. And by the time I got to Reading and Leeds, I was slightly in bits. But again, it was like, look, this is the last festival I'm ever going to do as editor of NME. So, you know, again, I'm just going to go and enjoy it and just suck the marrow out of the whole thing, and you guys can sort it. And I think Arctic Monkeys were going on the cover. They were headlining that year, I think. And it was like, it's all done. You know, they're a good band. You can trust them. They're going to be there at the photo shoot, right? You know, whatever. And on the Saturday, so they were headlining, so performing on the Saturday, cover gets done on the Sunday, remotely, job done. And on the Saturday, yeah, the announcement came through that there'd been this bust up, and Noel has said, that's it, officially, Oasis over. And you're sat there going, right, what the fuck? the biggest band of the last 20-25 years has just announced that they've properly broken up, but I'm supposed to do this Reading and Leeds cover, and I was utterly log jammed. I was so broken by that point. I could not make a decision as to what I was going to do with this whole thing. So again, what should have been a really brilliant weekend of kind of hanging around in the VIP area on plastic chairs, you know, drinking warm Carling and smoking Marlboro Gold, you know, turned into just this horrible, panicky, nasty thing. Because it was like, have they really broken up? They've done it before. They're going to get back together again. If I put Oasis Split on the cover and I've got to make that decision on a Sunday. It's not out until a Tuesday. If they reconcile on Monday, I look like a cock. You know, I've got to tell Melvin Ben at the fucking Festival Republic that, you know, we're not going to run his headline band on the cover. We're going with somebody else's band that's Split on the cover. That's going to cause mayhem, blah, 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 right? It was a horrible, horrible situation. I handled it really badly. And everyone's like, Conor, what are you doing? And eventually I made the decision to Arctic Monkeys. Right, I'm going to Arctic Monkeys done, sorted. And Chrissy, who was coming in as editor after me, you know, it's like the Pope. Somebody has to be NME editor at any given moment. So she'd got on a plane from New York because we got her back from a job that she'd taken on Details magazine. Details, was it? No, something else. Anyway, so she's working on a magazine in New York. We'd flown her back because she'd agreed to take the job. And she'd come straight from Heathrow Airport in a cab to Reading. And the agreement was that I would meet her on site on the Sunday. I would see through the whole of the issue until it was complete. And then while I was on site, I was NME editor. The minute I walked off site, she would become NME editor because she'd be the last remaining senior journalist on site. Right. So anyway, I finally meet up with her, text messages and stuff on a BlackBerry. And I meet up with her outside the second stage. And we're having a chat, and you know, I was going, oh, the Oasis thing, blah blah blah, you know, decision and whatever. And she said, what did you decide to do? And I said, well, I went with Arctic Monkeys. And there was suddenly this awkward silence. And I went, why? What would you have done? And she looked at me like I was fucking mental. And she went, I would have gone with Oasis. And it instantly, like the clouds parted, it was like, fuck, she's on it and I'm not. And I was like, you're right. I said, excuse me, I'm going to have to go. And I walked from there and I phoned Mark McLaren, who's the production editor. And I said to him, Mark, I know I've pissed you around for the last 24 hours. I said, but you're about to change the cover. I said, you're either going to do it because you believe it's the right thing to do, or you're going to do it because I've told you to do it and you're going to lose your job if you don't. But either way, you are about to change the cover. We're going with Oasis. And there was a silence because they've been working late nights. And I was like, get Joe Frost on the phone. Everybody hated me by that point because I'd just been buggering about. And it was like, right, Joe, we're doing this. I don't care whether you like me or not. This is the decision. And it was the right thing to do. And it pissed off Mean Fiddler, and Melvin Ben went fucking batshit. But I look back and I go, that's probably more Chris's cover than it is mine, because I was so broken by that point. She was on it. It was like time to hand over. And then I had this weird experience of saying goodbye to some people and kind of breaking down in tears and having to walk off. And then there's an entrance, a kind of a backstage entrance to Reading. And, you know, it's like it's a gate to the field. And it's where all the trucks come through and band buses and all that sort of stuff. And there is always some hard-bitten Glaswegian security guard in a, you know, high-vis vest who sat there on a plastic patio chair checking people in and out. And I walked with my bag and everything, and I'm stood on this kind of dusty bit of what had been a field until it had been trampled for 4 days. And beyond it is tarmac. And I know that the minute that I step from the dust onto the tarmac, 7 years is over. And I started at Reading and Leeds in 2002. That was my first gig as NME editor. And here I was exactly 7 years later. And the minute that I stepped over, it was almost like it was like a kind of a Harry Potter losing his magic sort of moment. And I just stood there looking at my feet, and this security guard is like, "Are you all right?" And I was like, yeah, I'm okay. He must have thought I was off my tits, but I just stood there because I couldn't move, because it just meant that it would all come to an end. And eventually you have to go and will yourself over onto that tarmac. And yeah, I just walked back to the hotel, didn't get a cab, didn't go left through Reading. I went right up through the kind of the red brick terrace houses and up onto the main road, and then walked back down to the hotel that we all stayed at, and got in my car and drove home, and that was it.
Right. Yes. I mean, what was the catalyst to you leaving NME? I don't know if we covered that really.
Well, it was just I knew it was over. It was the art. It was kids watching the Arctic Monkeys, knowing lyrics to tracks I hadn't even heard yet. You know, that was 2006, and I'm like, I've had a good run here. I've done really well. Go out on a high, and I was having lots of conversations with people about lots of exciting things that I could do in 2007, and then the global financial collapse hit. And the recession hit, and all of those conversations dried up overnight. And I was, you know, everybody who had a fucking job hung on to their job, and I had a job, and it was a good job, and it was well paid. And it was like, right, you don't move. So I was there for 2 years longer than I'd probably intended to be, you know, just waiting for the right thing to happen. But by the end of it, you know, sales were so poor because there was nothing you could do. Nobody wanted a magazine format anymore. You know, we had a website that was speaking to more people on a weekly basis than the NME had ever spoken to, and nobody gave a shit. You know, all anybody cared about were the kind of, you know, 6 monthly sales figures of this legacy format. And I was like, I was just done with it. I was so beaten up by the whole process, because it was like being on a, just sliding down a mountainside in an avalanche, and there was nothing to grab onto. There's nothing you could do to get yourself back up. And we were doing all the right things elsewhere, and we'd launched merchandising and ticketing and 6 national tours a year, and the NME Awards US and NME Radio and NME TV. It was fucking, you know, that was my toy box, right? There's all of that stuff, you know, I was able to run. And it was great, but you could not get the magazine sales up. And it was like, you know, is it because it's not populist enough, not mainstream enough, or is it because it's not cool enough? And neither of those was the answer, right? It was because it was a fucking magazine and nobody was buying magazines anymore, because they all had smartphones. So it was, you know, it was over for me. And also there were new bands coming along that I just didn't have an affinity with. Vampire Weekend and the Maccabees, right? Important bands, without a doubt, important bands that I could see Chrissy got and was really excited about, but they weren't touching me in the same way. I didn't feel it inside. I didn't want to go to the gigs to see them. I didn't want to hang around in the same after parties as them afterwards. And you go, and I also got to a point where I wasn't looking forward to festivals. And it's like, fuck me, if you get to a point where you're not looking forward to going to a festival, fuck off and make way for somebody who is, granddad, right? So it's like, I've done my time. For the sake of the paper and the scene and the journalists and the talent that needs to be given space to come up, because if Chrissy becomes editor, somebody becomes Depp, and somebody becomes, it's like those, it was log jammed. It was just like, I am the problem and not the solution. So, you know, I got offered a job which felt like a possible solution, and I just took it. Was it the right job? Didn't matter. It was just something to get the fuck out of there more than anything else. And as it was, I think, you know, Chrissy did a brilliant job of taking the magazine cooler. She almost overnight, with a click of her fingers, made the magazine really fucking cool by talking about a whole lot of music that I hadn't engaged with. And visually it found its groove immediately, and, you know, it sold, it crashed sales wise. absolutely crashed, because the answer was not cooler. The answer was not mainstream. The answer was that kind of magic formula that sits in between, and it just wasn't possible to achieve it anymore. And she ended up putting Oasis on the cover an awful lot, which is what you do when you're chasing sales.
Just aware of time, Connor, but just in terms, you've obviously stayed in magazines. You went to Top Gear magazine, is that right?
Yeah, I went to Top Gear. Yeah, I did it for a bit. I mean, you know, it's, for the record, that didn't really work out either, to tell you the truth. But yeah, that was the last thing that I did magazine wise for years, because I was just, the whole sector, the way that the ownership of it, and you know, the people who were running those boards at an exec level and everything was just rancid. There was no innovation coming out of any of it, and I'm like, oh, fuck off and do something else.
Did you get many Alan Partridge gags at the time?
More than you could ever possibly mention. Those obviously are not my words, they're the words of the internet.
That's the one, yeah. But yeah, the magazine industry in general, obviously it's still going, but how does it work now in terms of sales? Is it something that you can't prioritize magazine sales to work, or how does it work?
It's super different in a billion ways, and that was the problem previously, was that where you had publishing companies were PDF creation houses, that got turned into paper and it got put out through W.H. Smith Travel and John Menzies. That was the system, right? And it was really fucking simple, and therefore your route to growth is scale. So the more brands, magazines that you can put through that system, the greater your economies of scale, and therefore the more margin that you make. So you end up with big leviathans like, you know, kind of National Magazine Company, or NatMags as it was at the time, and IPC and all that sort of stuff. And the problem is, as soon as you get digital, actually all of those different magazine titles, the brand wants to connect with its audience in a completely different way. Some of them were itching to be kind of events businesses, and other ones were innovating to be platforms, and other ones wanted to be retail outlets. You know, the editorial was part of that mix, but the business models actually needed to fracture. Those execs and those systems could not hack it. They were used to running one business model repeated across, you know, 25 titles. Suddenly they were facing the prospect of running 25 different business models across those titles. So it's never going to work. So that I looked at it and I went, this whole thing needs to fracture and atomize, and it will coalesce in different ways around business models, not around subject areas, which is kind of largely what's happened. And yeah, it's very different now, but you know, the overheads have to be so small to make it profitable. It's really fucking hard. It's hard on the journalists. Nobody gets paid enough. You know, lots of people get exploited. It's tough. And that, you know, that history of being able to come down from some no-mark town, you know, in the north of England, you know, for me it was Bradford, and, you know, make your way in London and live in tiny places and sleep on people's floors and work your way up to eventually having a career in magazines. It's just not possible anymore. I mean, you know, and the worrying thing is, and NME at the moment is not like this, mercifully. It's run well by people who care and support people, but it's fucking hard. It's so much of the rest of the magazine industry is peopled by with staff that can afford to live and do this sort of thing as a hobby, because there's some mummy and daddy trust fund sat in the background that allows them to do it. And it's just fucking bullshit. And anybody from a working class background just gets filtered out of the system. It's not healthy. It's really not healthy. But, you know, it'll find a way. And in the same way that, you know, NME is now owned by a Singaporean businessman, you know, who owns a kind of a music creation platform, and, you know, and sells guitars through websites, right? It's like, you know, everything changes, and NME will continue to adapt and thrive, because it's like a fucking radioactive cockroach. You cannot kill it. That's the amazing thing about it. It turns up every few years in some new guise, but it's mutated. It's like Godzilla. God bless them.
A great finishing point. Is there a song from that time you'd want to play out to?
Oh God, I don't know. It's so hard to pick one. It would be a really trite thing to pick out any of the biggies. And you did mention this, and I've totally forgotten to think of. So I'll tell you what I'll go with. We'll go full circle. Given what's going on in the political climate at the moment, I would go with "Selfish Cunt, Britain is Shit."
Excellent. Oh, that's brilliant, Connor.
Cool. Been a pleasure.
Covered a lot of ground there. Yeah, I was going to mention Meet Me in the Bathroom book just because I thought he summed it up quite well, because I realised you contributed to it, and then I looked at it last night and you're actually the first line of the book.
I know. Yeah. God bless Elizabeth for Lizzie Goodman for kind of sticking me in there. Yeah, that did my profile the world of good. I think
you summed up the whole scene. Sorry, go on.
It reminded people that that I was still alive, I think, for a lot of them. But it was that quote was driven by my experience on Mixmag, actually, in dance music, those years 98 to 2000, which were so fucking mental and full on. And, you know, it was, you know, the magazines are always a pressure, because either things aren't going right and therefore you've got to work really fucking hard to fix them sales wise, or things are going gangbusters, in which case you're under a lot of pressure to make the very best out of that opportunity. There's never a time when you're not under massive pressure all the time. So, and it was, you know, I kind of, it was, you know, getting to NME, you know, kind of 5-7 years later and looking back, and you go, it's only really now that you go, on Mixmag in the late 90s, we were in the middle of a global cultural explosion that was going on, you know, that was affecting America, that was linked to Ibiza and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, it was incredible. And that's why, you know, that understanding of, you know, you don't realize because you don't realize you're in the golden age until you look back. You know, NME was fucking hard work. It was fucking hard work shifting mags on a weekly basis, making it relevant, making people care about it, you know, asking people to part with their hard-earned £2.50 or whatever it became at the end on a regular basis, you know, being respectful of the fact that, you know, that is a lot of money to somebody who's, you know, 17, 18 years old, because they could be spending it on, you know, top-up credits for a mobile phone, or they could be spending it on alcohol, all of which are arguably more important than an indie rag. And yet we had to make it worthwhile. That's a lot of responsibility. And you just work shitting hard at it. And then it's only many years later that you look back and go, fuck, look how far we've come.